Nobody wants a single mom with baggage. That's what my sister said, right there, at her own wedding, into the microphone, smiling. Hi, I'm Calista Vane, 34 years old, single mom, and an accountant in a small town called Charleston, South Carolina. My son Eli is 10, smart, gentle, fiercely kind, everything I ever wanted to raise in a world that's often too cruel. I've learned to keep my head down, to survive quiet rooms and cold shoulders, especially from my own family. But that day, standing in a ballroom full of polished people, hearing my sister laugh as she mocked my life in front of everyone, I finally hit the limit. What she didn't know, though, was that the man she was about to marry already knew the real me, long before he ever met her. And he had his own story to tell. I've always liked numbers. They don't lie, don't judge. People, on the other hand, a different story. That's why my tiny accounting office above a bookstore in Charleston felt like home. Just me, my calculator, and Eli's doodles taped on the filing cabinet. Mom, you almost done? Eli poked his head in, cheeks pink from soccer. He was 10, all elbows and energy, with a smile that made hard days easier. 5 minutes, I said, typing one last line. Homework? Spelling's done, but I need help with the American Revolution. I laughed. Of course you do. On the walk home, the air smelled like sea salt and blooming azaleas. Charleston was beautiful in spring, but I barely noticed anymore. My head was full of numbers and family obligations, especially the latest one, dinner at my mother's house with my sister Serena and her fiancé. My mother, Darlene, didn't ask if we could come. She commanded it. She always had a way of making us feel like guests in our own lives. Serena was the golden girl, with her glossy hair and perfect life. And now, she was marrying Julian Renner, a financial advisor with a Harvard degree and a face fit for a billboard. When Eli and I arrived, Darlene opened the door with her usual tight smile. You're late. We're on time, I replied. Inside, everything was perfectly curated. Lavender candles, lamb roast, and carefully chilled wine. Serena was perched on the couch like a queen. She barely looked at Eli. Then Julian stood and offered his hand. Nice to meet you. His eyes, hazel, warm, met mine, and something flickered. Familiarity. He crouched slightly. What grade are you in? 5th, Eli said. Best year. My volcano exploded at the science fair. You'll love it. Eli laughed. No one in that house ever made him feel seen. But Julian did. Serena's voice cut through. You're not wearing that to the wedding, right? I glanced at my blouse and slacks. It's just dinner. Darlene added. We didn't ask you to be a bridesmaid, dear. With your situation. That word, situation. Like my life was a stain on their perfection. I stayed quiet, nails pressing into my palm. Julian noticed, his jaw tight. Dinner was long, filled with wedding talk and backhanded comments. But Eli held my hand under the table. He always knew when I needed grounding. Later, as I organized RSVP cards in Darlene's study, Julian walked in with 2 coffees. You're basically running this whole wedding, he said. Someone has to. He studied me. Did you ever volunteer at Memorial Children's Hospital? I froze. Yes, a long time ago. My sister Lauren was there. You read to her, sang to her. She said you made the hospital feel safe. My breath caught. She called me Sunshine Girl. He nodded slowly. That was you. Just like that, the air changed. He wasn't just Serena's fiancé anymore. He was the boy who once watched his sister fade away and remembered the girl who made her smile. After that night in my mother's study, something shifted. Julian started showing up in small ways. A thank you text after I fixed the florist's order. A quick call to double-check the reception layout. He always made it seem casual, businesslike. But I wasn't stupid. I saw the way he lingered when we spoke. The soft edge in his voice when he asked about Eli. And most of all, I saw how Serena didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't care. Julian was just another accessory to her, presentable, educated, lucrative. 2 weeks before the wedding, the pressure hit a fever pitch. The dress fittings, seating charts, guest list corrections, all dumped onto me without a single please or thank you. My evenings disappeared into color-coded spreadsheets and napkin sample deliveries. And when I wasn't solving Serena's wedding meltdowns, I was helping Eli build his science project volcano. We worked at the kitchen table together, his hands covered in glue and baking soda. "You're doing too much, Mom," he said one night. I paused. "What makes you say that?" He shrugged. "You're always tired. You haven't smiled for real in a while." I smiled then, not because he was wrong, but because he saw me. My 10-year-old saw what no one else in my family cared to notice. The next day, Julian called. "Can we meet?" he asked. "Somewhere quiet. I promise it's not about place cards." We met at a coffee shop near the marina, where the scent of salt and espresso mingled in the air. He looked tired but resolute. "I need to ask you something," he said after we sat. "And I know it's going to be complicated." "Go ahead," I said, wrapping my hands around the mug. "I want you to be my maid of honor." I blinked. "That's not how it works. Serena didn't even ask me to be a bridesmaid." "I know," he said quickly. "She wouldn't. But I told her I want this. You've done everything already, and this... it feels right." I stared at him. "Julian, you're marrying my sister." He leaned in. "I thought I knew her. I thought I knew what I needed. Someone polished. Someone loud enough to drown out the grief. But then I saw you again, and it reminded me of what mattered." I shook my head, heart racing. "This isn't about me." "Yes, it is," he said softly. "Lauren loved you, and I see why." I didn't say yes, I couldn't, but I didn't say no either. That night, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on screen. "What were you thinking?" She hissed before I could even speak. "Serena is distraught. You had to make this about you, didn't you?" "I didn't ask for anything," I replied, voice even. "Julian did. You always play the victim. Just don't ruin her day." "I won't, but if she doesn't want me there, she can say so." There was a long pause. "You can't back out now. Julian's told everyone. Don't make a scene." I hung up without another word. Eli was on the couch, building a Lego space station. "Was that Grandma?" he asked without looking up. "Yeah." "She mean again?" I hesitated. "Let's just say, not very nice." He nodded. "Then don't listen. You always tell me to ignore people who are wrong." I chuckled despite myself. "Guess I better start taking my own advice." In the days leading up to the wedding, Serena avoided me completely. No texts, no calls, no passive-aggressive emails, which was almost eerie. I thought about pulling out a dozen times, but then I'd remember the look on Julian's face, or the way Lauren used to smile when Eli handed her a drawing. There were moments when I caught Julian watching me, like he was trying to solve a puzzle he already knew the answer to. There was no flirting, no touching, no inappropriate glances. Just awareness, like we were both waiting for something neither of us had the nerve to name. And beneath all of it, there was Eli. At his next soccer game, Julian showed up unexpectedly, standing on the sidelines next to me. "Didn't know you were into youth sports," I said. "I'm into seeing kids who matter being supported," he said simply. Eli scored a goal that day. He ran straight to us, beaming. And Julian knelt to give him a high five like it was the most natural thing in the world. That night, as I tucked Eli into bed, he whispered, "Is Julian going to be around more?" "Maybe," I said. "Why?" "I like him," he murmured. "He doesn't talk to me like I'm invisible." I kissed his forehead. "Me too, buddy." And just like that, something started to shift, not just in Julian or in me, but in the world around us. The day of the wedding was clear and warm, the kind of spring day Charleston was famous for: soft breeze, golden light, and the scent of jasmine in the air. Eli and I arrived early. He wore a navy suit and held my hand tightly, eyes wide with both excitement and unease. I wore a soft sky blue dress, simple, elegant, unassuming. I wasn't there to shine. I just wanted to survive. "You look awesome, Mom," Eli whispered. His words meant more than any compliment I could ever get from my family. Inside St. Andrew's Church, everything looked perfect. White roses, crystal chandeliers, every detail manicured to Serena's vision. Bridesmaids flitted around the dressing room, adjusting straps and sipping champagne. Serena stood at the center of it all in her custom gown, sparkling from head to toe, her expression sharp and unreadable. She barely looked at me. "Try not to trip when we walk down the aisle." "Good to see you too," I said, keeping my tone even. Darlene sat in the corner, already critiquing the photographer's angles. When she caught sight of me, she murmured, "That dress. Very you." I didn't flinch. I'd been called plain my entire life. It didn't sting anymore. The ceremony passed in a blur. I walked behind Serena, held her bouquet, adjusted her veil. I performed every duty with quiet grace, not for her, but for myself, for Eli, who sat in the front pew beside Julian's father, legs swinging nervously, face shining with pride every time our eyes met, for Julian, who caught my gaze from the altar and gave me the smallest nod, steady, warm. But nothing prepared me for what came next. The reception was held in a grand ballroom at the Charleston Opera House. High ceilings, soft candlelight, and champagne towers glittered under crystal lighting. It was extravagant and cold, like most things my family valued. Dinner had just been served when Serena took the microphone. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," she said sweetly, "especially my amazing bridal party, and of course my maid of honor, Callista." There was polite applause. I nodded graciously. Then her voice shifted, just a hair, but I recognized that edge. "And I really admire her," she continued, the smile tightening. "For raising a child alone, that takes courage, especially when no one's ever really loved you." The room stilled. A few people chuckled uncomfortably. "She's still on the market, folks," Serena added, laughing. "Anyone looking for secondhand goods with a bonus kid?" Laughter cut through the ballroom. Darlene laughed too, loudly. My stomach twisted. Eli's small hand found mine under the table. He was trembling. I stood up. I had to get him out of there. Out of that room. Out of that cruelty. Then a chair scraped loudly behind me. Julian stood. The room fell silent again. He walked to Serena and gently took the microphone from her hand. "I need to say something," he said, voice firm and low. Serena laughed awkwardly. "Julian, what are you?" He held up a hand. She froze. "This was supposed to be my wedding," he said, "but tonight reminded me that no amount of money, flowers, or polished veneers can hide the truth." Gasps spread across the room. He turned and looked at me. "Callista and I didn't just meet last month. We met years ago at Memorial Children's Hospital. My sister Lauren was dying. Callista was the one who sat with her, read to her, made her laugh. She was our light during the darkest time." I froze. Eli squeezed my hand harder. His eyes were wide. "She brought her son, too," Julian continued. "Little Eli, he drew stars and planets for Lauren. She kept everyone by her bed. She called him her little astronaut." The ballroom was dead silent. Julian turned back to the crowd. "So when I heard what was said here tonight, about Callista, about Eli, I knew I couldn't go through with this." Serena's jaw dropped. "You don't mean that." Julian looked at her without blinking. "I absolutely do. I'm calling off the wedding." Gasps again. A glass shattered somewhere in the back. Darlene stood up, pale as a ghost. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Julian said. "Send me the bill." Then he walked to Eli, got down on one knee. "Thank you," he said, "for being the light you are." Eli blinked, unsure, but nodded. Julian stood and turned to me. "Come with me?" I didn't move right away. Everything felt frozen, like my entire life had been leading to this one impossible moment. But then I took his hand. And together we walked out, past Serena's tears, past my mother's glare, past every person who ever made me feel less. We didn't stop until we were outside, under the Charleston stars. Julian hailed a cab. "I know a place," he said, "quiet, by the water." The restaurant he took us to was a little seafood shack overlooking the harbor. Wooden deck, fairy lights, the sound of waves crashing nearby. For the first time all day, I could breathe. We didn't say much during the meal. Eli colored on a napkin. Julian stared out at the water. Finally, he spoke. "I'm sorry." "For what?" I asked. "For the speech, the mess, everything." "You don't apologize for telling the truth," I said. He nodded. "After Lauren died, I lost myself. Serena was noise. I thought that's what I needed." "But it wasn't," I said. "No," he whispered. "It wasn't." His phone buzzed on the table. Serena's name lit up the screen. He silenced it. "She's going to keep calling," I said quietly. "She'll hear from my lawyer," he said. Eli looked up then. "Julian?" "Yeah, buddy?" "Remember those drawings, the stars I made for the lady in the hospital?" Julian smiled. "That was my sister. She loved them." "She said I was funny," Eli said. "You were her hero," Julian replied. The waves rolled in, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. The next morning, we visited Lauren's grave. The cemetery was quiet, tucked between tall pines and overlooking the bay. Julian walked slowly, white daisies in one hand and a small stone in the other, painted with a yellow sun and stars, edges worn with time. Eli walked beside him, hands in his coat pockets. "This was hers?" he asked, eyeing the stone. Julian nodded. "She kept it by her bed." We reached the marker, simple, clean, engraved with beloved. Julian knelt and placed the flowers, then gently set the stone beside them. "She always said your drawings made her feel brave." Eli stared. "I didn't think she'd remember me." "She never forgot you." I stood behind them, heart heavy but soft. It didn't feel like grief. It felt like closure. Julian stood and reached for my hand. I let him take it. A year later, my life had changed in ways I never thought possible. I opened a small financial office downtown, Vane Financial Services. The name had been Julian's idea. "You built this," he said. "Let them know it." The space was warm, honest, not fancy, but real. On the wall behind my desk hung Eli's latest drawing, a rocket ship blasting through a field of stars. Business was steady, word spread. People came not just for advice, but for someone who listened. At home, Eli thrived. He was stronger now, more sure of himself. He'd become the kind of kid who stood up for others, not just himself. And Julian? He never missed a single game, or dinner, or bedtime story. We weren't married, not yet. But we were a family. As for Serena and my mother, Darlene, they faded into the background. Serena's career never recovered from the wedding scandal. People talked, jobs stopped calling. She moved away quietly, without a word. My mother tried to reach out. Voicemails, awkward apology cards, but I didn't answer. I had nothing cruel to say. I just had nothing left for them. Some endings don't need revenge, just silence. It was Christmas Eve when Julian brought out the box. Eli was asleep on the couch, the glow of tree lights dancing on his face. Julian and I sat by the fire, cocoa in hand. "This belonged to Lauren," he said, opening the lid. Inside sat a vintage emerald ring. "She told me to give it to someone who reminded me what love means. That's you." Tears rose before I could speak. "Callista," he said, "will you marry me?" I looked at the ring, at the boy asleep under the tree, at the man who saw me before I saw myself. "Yes," I whispered. Outside, snow began to fall, light, gentle, like peace finally finding a place to land. There's something funny about healing. You don't notice it at first. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or fireworks. It's quieter than that, like a door you'd forgotten was ever locked suddenly swinging open. For years, I thought survival was the best I could hope for. I thought if I kept my head down, stayed useful, stayed silent, maybe I'd earn some scrap of grace. I thought love had to be earned through self-sacrifice, but I was wrong. Love, the kind that heals, the kind that lasts, is never about proving you're worthy. It's about being seen, exactly as you are, and still being chosen. When Serena mocked me at her wedding, I could have let it define me. I could have walked away, once again absorbing the cruelty my family had handed me for years. But I didn't, because that moment, public, humiliating, and awful, became something else. A mirror, a line in the sand. And on the other side of that line stood Julian, choosing not perfection, but truth. And standing beside us was Eli, my son, my anchor, my reason. I don't know what the future holds. I don't expect life to be easy just because I finally stepped into the light. But I do know this. I have a home now, not just the roof over our heads, but the space where we laugh, fight fair, and let each other be human. I have work that matters, a son who shines, a man who never asked me to shrink myself. Serena once called me secondhand, but secondhand means lived in, proven, resilient, and I'll take that any day over being shiny and hollow. To anyone listening, if you've ever been told you weren't enough, weren't wanted, weren't worthy, I'm here to say that was never the truth. You were always more than they saw. You were always worth choosing. I see you, and I hope one day you see yourself too. He laughed when his father mocked my dead mother. That was the moment I knew. I couldn't marry him. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted to make a scene. I didn't even stand up right away. I just sat there, frozen, while my heart cracked open in silence. My name is Sloan Merrick. I'm 33 years old, and what I'm about to tell you is the story of how one polite, hollow laugh ended an entire future I had convinced myself I wanted. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my drink. I didn't storm out. What I did was colder, quieter, and 1,000 times more permanent. Because when someone shows you who they are, not in a fight, but in the way they stay silent when you need them loud, you don't unsee it. You don't unfeel it. Especially when it's about the woman who gave up everything to raise you alone. If someone laughed while the person you loved most in the world was turned into a punchline, would you still marry into that silence? I met Evan Langford 6 years ago at a gallery opening in Beacon Hill. I was there to shoot the event. Low pay, decent exposure, and free wine if I kept my badge on. He was there with a group from his firm, all tailored suits and quiet laughter. He noticed one of my black and white prints, complimented the lighting, and said it reminded him of something his mother would hang in their summer house on the Cape. I smiled, flattered, and thought, so this is what it feels like to be seen by someone like him. We had coffee a week later, then drinks, then weekends in Vermont, shared playlists, inside jokes, recipes. It wasn't fast, but it was easy. He showed up. He remembered things. He was polished in all the right ways. Patient, observant, a little too careful maybe, but steady. When I told my mom about him, she gave me that soft smile she reserved for things she was cautiously happy about. He sounds like he's got a good heart, she said. Let's just hope he's got the strength to match it. At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. Now I do. The first time Evan met my mother, Celeste, it was a Sunday. We had takeout Thai on the balcony of our third-floor walk-up in Dorchester. My mom wore a blue cardigan with a hole in the sleeve and served iced tea in mason jars. Evan brought peonies and used his napkin every time he took a bite. She asked about his work, his parents, what he read for fun. He answered with ease and charm. After he left, she watched me fuss with the empty containers and said, "He's impressive, but I hope he sees the world the way you do." "He's just formal," I said. "He's not used to us." She didn't push. She never did. But I saw something flicker behind her eyes. A weight she didn't want to hand me. I ignored it. We moved in together a year later, got a dog. I started getting steadier work, editorials, weddings, even a small gallery show of my own. He got promoted. Life looked like it was supposed to look. We talked about travel, home ownership, starting a family. Then my mom got sick. It started with fatigue, then a cough. Then came the scans, the hospital visits, the diagnosis. Stage 4. I dropped everything. Work, weekends, photography. I moved into her apartment to take care of her. Evan helped. At first. He drove me to appointments when he could, brought takeout, sat on his phone while I rubbed lotion into her fragile skin. I told myself that was enough, that him being there physically, even if not emotionally, was a form of love. The night she passed, I curled up in his arms and sobbed into his chest. I remember thinking, thank God I'm not alone. But even then, I felt the space between us, something cold and quiet that didn't shrink, no matter how hard I tried to pretend it wasn't there. A year after she died, Evan proposed. It was on a rooftop, under string lights, with a ring that probably cost more than my mom made in a year. I said yes. Through tears. Through the ache in my chest I couldn't name. I told myself it was just grief, just missing her, just nerves. But the truth? I think part of me already knew. Wedding planning should have been joyful. I wanted it to be. I tried. I bought a new notebook, bookmarked ideas, made vision boards. But every time I suggested something that reminded me of my mom, it was met with resistance so subtle, it felt like my grief was the one being impolite. It started with little things. I mentioned placing a framed photo of my mother on the memory table. Evan tilted his head, smiled that thin, diplomatic smile, and said, "Let's not make the day too sad, babe. She wouldn't want that." When I brought up including a line about her in my vows, just one sentence, one quiet thread that tethered her to this day, he didn't even look up from his laptop. "Vows are meant to look forward," he said, "not backward." His parents were worse. Margaret Langford, his mother, had a binder full of classic floral arrangements, venues, fonts. When I suggested adding a few calla lilies, my mom's favorite, she barely looked up before saying, "Callas are a bit somber. Let's keep it light, darling." Daniel, his father, called me sentimental like it was a flaw. "Big heart, Sloan," he said once. "Just don't let it hijack the ceremony." They said it all with smiles, with polite tones, and Evan never disagreed. When I told him it hurt, that I felt like they were erasing her, he said, "They're just being themselves. They mean well." But I wasn't asking them to mean well. I was asking them to see me, to understand that my mother wasn't just someone I loved. She was the reason I became the kind of woman Evan claimed to love. The silence started small, like hairline fractures in a pane of glass. A skipped detail, a suggestion brushed aside. But the more I tried to fold pieces of my mother into the ceremony, the more invisible I became in my own wedding. We had a tasting event one night. The wine flowed freely. Daniel swirled his glass and said to me, "You know, most men would be overwhelmed by how attached you still are to your mother." I blinked. She'd been dead for 2 years. Evan just looked away. Later in the car, I asked him, "Why didn't you say anything when your dad said that?" He kept his eyes on the road. "I didn't want to make a scene." "You didn't want to defend me," I corrected. He didn't answer. And that silence? That was the moment I stopped believing this wedding was about us. Every interaction chipped away at something soft in me. Margaret repeatedly mispronounced my last name, even after I corrected her more than once. Daniel dismissed my photography business as a charming little hustle. Neither of them ever asked how I was doing or what my mother was like, but they expected me to be grateful, to smile through it all, to be easy. And Evan, he expected that too. Every time I brought it up, he said the same thing. "Focus on us, Sloan." But how could I? When us included the people who taught him how to stay silent while others shrink you. At a planning dinner, I suggested changing the centerpieces to lavender and cream, my mother's favorite colors. Margaret looked at me like I'd suggested paper plates and said, "Let's not make this feel like a memorial service." That night, I stood in the kitchen alone, hands flat on the countertop, just breathing. I wasn't crying, I wasn't angry. I was hollow. My grief had stopped aching. It had turned to something sharper, cold and still. I realized I wasn't just losing her all over again. I was losing myself. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Monarch Room, an exclusive venue with velvet chairs, a glass ceiling, and walls so pristine they felt hostile. Margaret called it understated elegance. I thought it looked like a hotel lobby trying too hard. I wore a soft lavender dress. It wasn't flashy or designer, but it was the one my mom had once admired when we went window shopping, and I had saved it for this night. I dabbed on her favorite perfume, just behind the ears, and walked in trying to breathe like she had taught me. Steady, measured, even when everything inside me felt tight. The room was full of strangers in tailored suits and high heels. On my side, there were 5. My dad, my cousin Noelle, and 2 of my mother's closest friends. The other 40 seats were filled with people I didn't know. Evan's extended family, his parents' friends, business contacts, country club acquaintances. I smiled. I nodded. I swallowed champagne like it was medicine. Dinner passed in a blur of clinking cutlery and polite laughter. Margaret floated between tables like a queen bee, adjusting flowers and brushing cheeks. Evan looked relaxed, practiced. I watched him from across the room and tried to remember the version of him I once believed in. Then came the toasts. Margaret spoke first, tapping her glass with a butter knife. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice dripping with polished affection. "It means the world to us to celebrate Evan and Sloane, our beautiful couple." She praised Evan's accomplishments, then added with a little smirk, "When Evan first brought Sloane home, I didn't quite know what to make of her. Artistic, independent, very expressive." Laughter from a few tables. "But I've come to appreciate her free spirit. She's taught Evan patience, that's for sure." More laughter. I smiled, tight and shallow. Then Daniel stood up. "I've watched my son become a man who makes bold decisions, and choosing Sloane, well, that might have been his boldest yet." Chuckles rippled through the room. He held his glass high. "But let's talk about family, because that's what tonight's really about. 2 families becoming one." He paused, looked straight at me. "Now Sloane comes from a spirited background. Her mother, Celeste, was one of a kind, very involved, always had a suggestion or two." He let it hang there, smiling like he'd just told a charming joke. Margaret chimed in. "Oh, she definitely had opinions." Daniel added, "Even when we didn't ask for them. But she was generous, I'll give her that. Helped us out quite a bit, sometimes a little too much if you ask me." And then he winked. The room laughed. I didn't. My mouth dried out. My hand shook around the stem of my glass. I looked at Evan. He was smiling. And then he laughed, softly. But he laughed. That was my mother they were talking about. The woman who worked 3 jobs to raise me. The woman who co-signed the loan that saved Daniel's restaurant. Who organized their books, bought them a new oven when theirs broke down. The woman who helped pay for Evan's brother's final semester of college. They turned her into a punchline. Daniel finished with, "Let's just hope Sloane doesn't inherit too much of that enthusiasm. We wouldn't want her meddling too much, now would we?" That was it. I set my glass down. My chair scraped against the floor as I stood. The sound was louder than anything else that night. The room froze, mid-bite, mid-laugh, mid-sip. Margaret blinked. "Everything all right, dear?" Evan reached for my wrist. "Sloane?" I stepped forward. My voice shook, but I didn't lower it. "Are you serious right now?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "You stood here in front of your friends and your family and mocked the woman who made this wedding possible. The woman who helped you when you had nothing. And you think that's funny?" Margaret laughed nervously. "Oh, come now, it was just a little humor." "No, it was disrespect." I turned to Evan. "And you laughed." His face drained of color. "I didn't mean to. You didn't mean to embarrass me, or you didn't mean for me to see you clearly." Silence. My dad's fists were clenched in his lap. Noelle looked like she wanted to scream. My mother's best friend was wiping her eyes. I turned to the Langfords. "I loved your son. I was ready to be part of this family. But if this is how you treat the dead, I can't imagine how you treat the living." I turned to Evan. "We're done." And I walked out. The cold night air hit my face like truth. It was the first breath I'd taken in months that didn't feel filtered. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. The morning after the rehearsal dinner, I moved like a ghost through my apartment. The tea I made sat untouched. My phone buzzed every few minutes, messages, missed calls, but I didn't answer. I didn't want comfort. I wanted quiet. Eventually, I opened the small wooden keepsake box on my dresser. My mother had carved tiny wildflowers into the lid back when her hands were still steady. Inside were the things I had left of her. A Polaroid of us in front of the laundromat, her Sunday earrings, a church bulletin with her handwriting. but the locket wasn't there. I checked again, dug through everything, checked under the photo, under the earrings, nothing. I tore through drawers, pockets, even the couch cushions. Only one person had been here recently, Evan. He'd stopped by to drop off my wedding shoes. He'd asked to use the bathroom. I had said yes without thinking. I picked up my phone and texted, "Did you take the locket from my mom's box?" 10 minutes later, he replied, "What are you talking about?" I didn't play along. It's gone. You were the last one here. This time, he waited longer before replying. I borrowed it. I just wanted to feel close to you. I was going to give it back. Borrowed. I called him. He answered quickly, voice shaky. "Sloan, I didn't steal it. I meant to—" "You opened a box that wasn't yours. You took something sacred." I panicked after last night. I thought maybe, if I had something of hers, I'd understand you better. I laughed, cold, flat. "You let them mock her. You laughed too, and now you think touching a locket fixes it?" He went silent, then said, "It's at my parents' house. I didn't want to lose it." Of course. I didn't tell him I was coming. I just drove. When I arrived, Margaret opened the door. Her expression said everything. Regret, shame, maybe fear. I didn't wait. "Where is it?" She blinked. "The locket?" "Yes." Richard's voice rang out behind her. "Just give it to her." Moments later, Evan came down the stairs. He held the locket between two fingers like it meant nothing. He handed it to me. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to protect me either." I opened the locket. One side held my grandmother's photo. The other side, still blank. The empty space was exactly where I had left it. You loved the version of me that never made waves, but when I needed you to stand up for me, for her, you disappeared. "I was scared," he whispered. "You could have said sorry. You could have respected something for once." He didn't answer. Behind him, Margaret and Richard stood in that familiar, uncomfortable stillness. I turned and walked out. No shouting, no tears, just truth. The days after I ended it passed like fog, soft at the edges, but heavy. I didn't respond to the messages. Evan called twice, then he stopped. Margaret sent one cold email titled, "Regretful Circumstances." I deleted it before finishing the second sentence. I wasn't ready to talk about it, not with them, not even with the friends who meant well. Instead, I walked. Every morning, I put on my sneakers and followed the same route my mom used to take on Sundays. Past the bakery with the cracked window. Around the corner with the yellow house she always said looked like a butter cookie. Down to the park bench where she used to sit with her thermos and breathe. One morning, I brought the locket. I sat where she used to sit, the spring sun warming my back, and turned the locket over in my hands. The gold caught the light, soft and steady. I opened it. My grandmother's face smiled calmly from one side. The other side, the space my mother said was, "for when you know," was still blank. But for the first time, it didn't feel like something was missing. It felt like space, like possibility, like choice. I closed the locket, held it in my palm, and whispered, not into the air, but into the quiet between us. "I walked away, Mom. I didn't stay small. I chose your voice. I chose mine." There was no thunderclap, no wind shift, but I swear, in that moment, the light changed. I went home, made tea the way she liked it, chamomile with honey and a twist of lemon, and poured it into her old chipped mug, the one with the crack she never bothered to fix. "Let it show," she used to say. "That's how people know it survived." The wedding dress was boxed and returned. The venue issued a partial refund. The countdown app on my phone stayed frozen on the rehearsal dinner date until I deleted it. People whispered. I saw it in their eyes, their cautious texts. "You okay? What really happened?" I didn't owe anyone an explanation. What mattered was what I said when I stood in that room, when I looked at the people who laughed at my grief, and walked away. I hadn't just left a man. I had stood up for the woman who raised me when no one else would. I had said, she mattered, her love, her memory, her story. And in doing that, I had finally told myself, so do you. Looking back now, I think part of me always knew. Evan didn't have the strength to hold space for all of me. He loved the curated version, the smiling one, the quiet one, the woman who didn't ask his family to bend. But my mother didn't raise me to be palatable. She raised me to be whole, to know that love without respect is not love. I don't regret saying yes to Evan, but I'm proud I had the strength to say no too. Because sometimes, the most powerful yes you can give is the one you whisper to yourself when no one else is listening. If someone ever asks you to erase the person who made you who you are, walk away. And if someone laughs at your grief, remember, silence isn't neutral. It's complicity. You deserve more than that. You are not too much. You are not too sensitive. You are not alone. You are sacred. And you are enough.